Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership. I have a little confession to make just between us friends, and this will all make sense in a minute. But my confession is this. I'm kind of a Disney fan. Not just the movies or the theme parks, but the business. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a fanatical Disney fan like some people you know, but I've always been interested in the how and the why of the Disney way. And so when I had the opportunity to bring Rob Mathews on the show and talk about his new book, Entrepreneurship the Disney Way, I jumped at the chance. Rob is the director of the Institute for Entrepreneurship and Free Enterprise at Ball State University and co-author of Entrepreneurship the Disney Way, a book about how the media giant maintains its lead in a turbulent, competitive, ever-changing industry by sticking to its mission. From Walt Disney's vision way back in the 1920s to its status today as a multinational media giant, Disney's mission, its North Star, has remained the same. Disney is a legacy company that has been directed by the same mission since inception. Its well-crafted mission statement is anything but corporate fluff. It's corporate bedrock. And I'm so excited to jump into this. Rob, so great to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, you know what? Things couldn't be better. And I love this topic. I've been eager to jump into it. And I want to talk to you about this book, about the Disney Way, this legacy company. But before we do, give us a little background on who you are. What did we miss by way of intro?
Well, first, thanks for having me on today. I appreciate that. And so I've been in higher ed for a long time. I've owned my own businesses. I've done a lot of training, a lot of facilitations, workshops, speaking engagements over the years, and probably did my higher ed career backwards as I worked in programming and teaching a lot. And then I thought, hey, I'm like 12 or 13 years into this. I should probably get a doctorate. So I did the doctorate in my 30s and 40s with 2 young kids and a business on the side and a full-time job at the university. And so, most people don't do it that way, but that was my path. And I've kind of learned over the years to never be ashamed of your path. So you'll discover some of my other things that I enjoy as we move along, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up that story about kind of doing it backwards, because I kind of did it the way that they tell you to do it, right? I came out of undergrad, I went right into grad school. And as I look back, I think there's a lot that I missed by going through grad school at a younger age. Like I look back and I go, if I would have known then what I know now, I would have done it much differently. I would have paid attention to different sections of the textbook, or actually what I would have done is spent more time networking and socializing with the other classmates. But we could go on that direction forever and run out of time on this great book that you've just written. So tell us about this book and why Disney. Are you a huge Disney fan?
I liked it when you said, I'm a Disney fan. I'm a fan of the business model. I'm not going to say I'm a fanatic, but I would say I'm a fanatic for sure. So I got a chuckle out of that when you said that. But so why Disney? My colleague and I, Mike Goldsby, who's the co-author, we would go to the parks sometimes together, sometimes with our individual families. And I always just came away, and I've always been this way in whatever business I would go into, or really any situation. I'm always curious. I'm a watcher, an observer, and I like to see how things are running, what the interactions are. And Disney just struck me as different. And the business model just fascinated me. So I would say I became a fan, definitely a paying customer who was very loyal. And then over time, you think, gosh, I should write about this and capture what they do and how they do it. So the book kind of came about that way, as we had accumulated all this knowledge, and we had some friends in the company too that we would consult with, which is just difficult. Disney's a pretty guarded company, but the book itself is unique. I think it's a unique look at Disney, because the first half of the book really focuses on the historical side and Walt Disney as an entrepreneur, and specifically how he was really an alpha entrepreneur. He was good at doing a lot of different things.
Well, tell us a little bit about this term alpha entrepreneur.
In the book, we outline what we call the entrepreneurial leadership instrument, and it measures. It's actually an assessment tool, and it measures 4 different styles of entrepreneurial leadership: artist, scientist, builder, evangelist. And we think Walt was one of those kind of extraordinary leaders that could really excel at all 4 of those for the most part. I mean, his brother Roy O was very instrumental as a builder and kind of as the business person.
And I think somewhat of an unsung hero in the story of Disney, right?
Oh, no question. A lot of people don't realize he was the longest running CEO by far of the company, like 42 years. So yeah, he in his business mind kind of kept Walt on track a little bit. So definitely.
So tell me about the mission that Disney has. So we're talking about a well-crafted, long time, stood the test of many different CEOs, many different economies, the ups and downs of the markets, all of that. And they've stayed true to this mission. Talk to us a little bit about what their mission is and how they've stayed true to it.
Yeah, the book obviously talks about Disney, the Walt Disney Company, the whole company. But we really hone in on the parks and resorts because that's a physical manifestation of Walt's dreams, right? Where people could touch and feel the company. And so the mission really, if you boil it down to just a couple of words for parks and resorts, it's really we create happiness. And I mean, we could recite the whole mission, right? But it really comes down to we create happiness. That's simple. People can rally around that. And I think you could toss in like guest experience in there too. So, but the experience is what creates the happiness. So that was Walt's dream, many decades ago. And it's so rare that a founder's dream, especially from that era, you're talking really, he had the dream for a long time, but 1920s. And then when they launched Disneyland, for that to stand the test of time like that it's amazing. And the company and the cast members really buy into it.
Yeah, and when you look at it, the simplicity of it, but it also explains a lot, right? So you use the word create. Create means that it's ever changing, it's evolving, there's opportunity, there's innovation. So it's not limited. It's not a mission statement that's basically pinned in at all the corners and that you try to play within a box, but it allows for this growth. And then you say create happiness. And to each person, they define happiness differently. So I know we've been focusing a little bit on the parks and resorts, but everybody who experiences Disney experiences it in a different way. For example, they also own like ESPN, right? Which for a lot of sports fans and things like that, I mean, that's their way to happiness. There's the resorts, there's the vacation clubs, there's the movies, there's the books. I was reading a book with my daughter just the other night. I was interested to turn it over and see that they published the book, even though the book's nothing about Disney or princesses or anything like that.
Walt was way before his time in this idea of generating feelings in people. And just to give you an example, he described this, and I'll kind of paraphrase it, but he described this idea of you could even create feelings in people through the soles of their feet, like through the soles of their shoes. And the idea that in a theme park, if you traverse from one land to another, the flooring, the ground actually changes to a point where you feel it and it creates a different feeling in you. And it makes you believe you're in this mythical land in this park. And you kind of lose sense of reality when you go to their parks to a certain degree. And he was way before his time on that because if you look at marketers today, I mean, that's what it's all about, is creating emotion and an emotional connection. But it's so hard to do. But Disney has carried that through and really mastered it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how Disney has done that. And we talk about the number of different CEOs that come through the program. Obviously, Roy Disney spent a lot of time at the helm. Walt Disney kind of created the vision. But since that time, you've had a lot of different, unique, very strong personalities that have come through, and yet the culture has remained.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things about the book. And if you would have told me when we were writing it that chapter about all of the leadership transition after Walt would be what I would find fascinating, I would have thought, no way. But what's interesting is Walt's fingerprint was just so strong on that company. When Roy, his brother, took over after his death in 1966, realized the Florida project, Walt Disney World, wasn't even started yet. I don't think people realize that. And Roy was not an extroverted, outgoing, inspirational person. He was behind the scenes, working the numbers, keeping logic in place. And he had to play a different role. And for 5 years, he carried that project. It's really an amazing story. So there's Roy. And then you have some really quiet years with Don Tatum and Card Walker, who were really Walt kind of disciples, creative people. But it was kind of quiet. They were finding their way. They were kind of protecting their turf. And then the company went through some what we would call corporate pirate threats, where people said, "Hey, we could do a leveraged buyout of the company, the shares in the company, and we could sell off the pieces for more than the entire company was worth." Some family members stepped in to protect the company from that, and they brought in investors, and those things don't necessarily, aren't totally relevant to this conversation, but there was a lot of jockeying. And then, boom, Michael Eisner hits, 1984. Eisner re-energized the company. The guy was creative. He was relatively fearless. If you think about how much the company was built up, I mean, the physical infrastructure, so much of it happened during Eisner's tenure, especially the first 10 years.
And it's interesting. I would imagine a lot of the listeners are thinking back to Sunday evenings and watching, Disney, Sunday Night Disney.
Yeah, could be. I mean, anything to engage the customer, right? But Eisner built up the parks. I mean, he built up Disney World to something that it really kind of more of Walt's vision in the sense of how big and massive it is, with multiple parks and multiple things to do. And like you said, multiple ways to appeal to different types of people. But Eisner was an artist, but he also dug into the history of the company. He really showed a great reverence for Walt and Roy and the history of the company. Here's a little interesting tidbit about Eisner. Eisner, for the first half of his tenure, he was paired with Frank Wells, who was the president of the company. Frank Wells was really essentially the Roy O. Disney. He was the business person. He was the kind of the builder who kind of kept things on track and said, "Okay, Michael, we have to find ways to fund this, and we have to make sure that this is a logical decision." Well, Wells dies in a helicopter accident, and that was roughly halfway through Eisner's tenure, and it really changed Eisner's kind of trajectory. But Eisner, I can guarantee you, Bob Iger, the current CEO, and the current company in general really has a lot to thank Eisner for, because he built up incredible infrastructure that allowed the company to grow into, and they're currently growing into it in a massive way.
Well, but then they kind of threw him out, right? I mean, there was some controversy towards the end there.
Yeah, there was definitely he did step aside, but yeah, there was some. It soured a little bit at the end, but I can tell you, having said that, Eisner is beloved in the company because they realize the infrastructure he built up is so valuable today. It allowed them to expand into it. And that's really where Bob Iger's strength is. Bob Iger, no question, is a builder. The guy puts systems and processes into place to maximize the infrastructure and the physical assets, the people. We could talk also about what's next for the company, because
let's do that. That's a fascinating idea right there. What is next for Disney?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, but
I think your guess is better than mine because of all the research you've done. So I'm all ears right now.
All right, fair enough. So Iger is a systems person. If you look at all the systems he's put in place, like My Magic Plus, My Disney Experience, all these online and app-based platforms that really have helped manage the volume that Disney parks are feeling. You also have the TV pressure on the other side. ABC and ESPN are, that's a changing market, and they're not as successful as they used to be.
Well, they used to be dominant because there was no competition, right? I mean, when it came to sports, ESPN was it. Now you turn on, there's 37 channels of sports.
No competition, but also new platforms, new online platforms, new ways of accessing TV, new desires on TV. That people handle TV differently than they used to. So there's added pressure on the parks and resorts to perform. They are really the cash cow right now, and we're in a good economy. And so I think with Iger, what we project is that the next CEO will very much be kind of an evangelistic, inspirational person, someone who can rally the troops, if you will, and get people excited again. And not that Iger is depressing people. I don't want that to come across, but that's not his strength or talent. Iger is a systems person who has grown the company immensely with acquisitions and with new ways of doing business and new ways of handling the volumes of people that go to the parks and resorts. But we think the next CEO will likely be someone who's very inspirational, very, very people-centric. That's our guess.
Well, let me ask you, as a Disney fan yourself, do you feel like we're heading into a future where some of the nostalgia that you have at Disneyland that you experienced as a kid and maybe grew up and still have as an adult is going to be lost on the next generation? And the reason I say that is because we've gone to Disney, and we're out here near Disneyland, so we go mostly to Disneyland, and we've spent 15 days there in the last couple of years, and we never go on Peter Pan, right? The line is an hour and a half, and it's just a bunch of moving cardboard things, and that's not us. And so I don't anticipate that my kids are going to grow up with this nostalgia for the old Disney. How does that play into kind of the future with technology and things like that?
That is a really good question. I think that, well, in some ways, there was a little bit of an answer embedded in the way you asked the question, which was it had a 150-minute wait or whatever. And so Peter Pan is one of those classic attractions that is still always busy and always popular. Now, granted, side note, the throughput on it isn't extremely great, but it still is very popular. So our family is like yours. We and I may get in trouble, for saying this because I love Disney.
It's just you and me.
Yeah, sure. We're a lot like you. We don't always ride the classics, and because we want to try the new stuff, and we like thrill rides. Walt was more of a slow ride kind of guy, and those rides are incredible. But I think there's still a huge segment of their fan base that carries those traditions of the slow rides and the classics onto their kids and their nephews and their nieces and such. So does the face of Disney change a little bit when you bring in Marvel and Star Wars and Pixar and any other franchises you can think of? Yeah, I think it does. But I think what it does is it actually perpetuates, and there are people who would disagree with me on this, but I think it perpetuates Walt's vision of things would ever change with the company to stay relevant in the marketplace. So I'm going to give you a 50-50 answer. Yeah, I think there's a faction of Disney fans who like the new stuff, but there's still a faction of fans who carry on the traditions of the classic attractions.
Yeah, and they're always doing different things. I mean, every time we go, it's a little bit different. And I wanted to ask you, so being kind of in the middle between Disneyland and Disney World, which do you prefer and why?
Oh, my goodness. That's a tough question in the Disney fandom out there. I have an answer. By the way, there's dissension in our family on this answer.
Oh, controversy, conflict within the ranks.
Yes. I love Walt Disney World and Disneyland. They are very distinctly different experiences, but they're also distinctly Disney. Personally, I've been to Disney World so many times. I love the uniqueness of Disneyland. I feel like it's more relaxed. You can, if you stay at one of their resorts, you have your resort hotel, downtown Disney, and the two parks are all within, like from front to very back end of one of the parks is like a 15-minute walk. So I like that. I like feeling like I'm in a bubble in that regard. Some people would say that's not true of Disneyland, but if you stay in one of their resort hotels, you really are in a bubble if you choose to be. Disney World is a huge bubble, and I have immense respect and love for it. If I had to pick one, I feel like I personally like Disneyland a little bit better. I love California Adventure Park. I think it is so neat and kind of underappreciated in the Disney fandom. But I do love Disney World. One of our kids loves Disney World more, and one loves Disneyland more, and my wife loves Walt Disney World a little bit better. But all of us love both of them.
Well, that sounds like a very politically correct answer. I got to tell you, I went out to Disney World and we didn't have a super exciting time because it rained the whole time out in Florida. We were out there in the end of May and it just wasn't the best experience for us. We've always had a great experience at Disneyland, being very near here, and it's always been dry when we go, knock on wood. But I just love recently going and seeing the new developments of Marvel and Pixar. But this isn't a Disney podcast, and so let's shift gears just a little bit and talk leadership and talk about bringing this back to our listeners and their companies. So we all have the ability to build maybe not massive conglomerate type multinational companies like Disney, but we all have the opportunity to create missions within our businesses and stick true to that mission. And I want you to talk about kind of that sticking true to the mission and the importance of that and what that's meant, in looking at Disney and also now for our companies listening today.
Yeah, I really think this applies to just about any size of company or almost any industry you can think of. You may have to redefine who the customer is to make it fit. But for me, have a simple and meaningful mission that people want to connect to. They want to connect to something special. I think a lot of people view mission as fluff, but the truth is people want to rally around something. So I think that's really important. 2 would be make each role critically important to the mission and make sure your employees understand that. Like they understand that their role is critical to fulfilling that mission. 3, I would say connect your employees with the customer directly as much as possible.
And why is that important? Because I agree with you. And that's, I think, such a key point, connecting our employees with our customers.
So I guess in short, I would say give your employees 2 things. Number 1 is create intentionality in how your employees interact with your customers, like build it into the plan. Okay. And so Disney does that in their parks and resorts with very intentional interactions. 2 would be give your employees creative license, creative authority to do special things for your customers. Here's the deal. And I'll tell you, I ran a business like this for a few too many years before I figured it out. Don't have your employees scared of making a mistake in giving your customer too much. Instead, let them err on the side of giving too much. You can always have a side conversation and say, yeah, we may not be able to afford to do exactly what you did, but you did make the customer happy. The truth is, when you do that, rarely are you ever going to say you did too much for the customer.
And I would absolutely agree with you. I heard a podcast interview just recently with David Neeleman, the gentleman who started JetBlue Airlines. And one of the quotes he said that I think relates to what you just said, and that is, his goal within his company is that when something went wrong, customer service would make it right to the point that the person who felt wronged walked away a stronger fan than they were before they were wronged. And I think it's an interesting idea of empowering our employees that they can be out in the community with our clients, with our customers, providing an experience such that they will want to come back stronger than they were even before they were injured.
Definitely. We like to, so this is a really interesting statistic from Disney. I believe it's about 70 to 80% of the correspondence they receive from guests after trips, after vacations, where they are praising the company. Disney has billions of dollars in immaculate infrastructure, but what people comment on in their emails, their phone calls, their chat sessions, whatever it is, they comment on these incredible interactions they had with cast members. That's amazing to me, and it speaks volumes to how you create a premium business model.
As you just said that, I had this memory that when Frozen came out, they had set up this little house just actually right across from Peter Pan, and you would wait in line for about an hour to meet Anna and Elsa. And I remember that as we waited in line, my two daughters were, let's call it 10 and 7, something like that. And while we were waiting in line, they were playing, the hand slap game that kids play often, where they're doing like rhymes and kind of slapping hands together. And as they got to the front of the line, Anna and Elsa, the characters that were playing, the cast members that were playing these characters, joined in and, did the hand clap, and they had my daughters teach them. They spent, let's call it an extra 15 seconds with my daughters. And we still tell this story, and we're looking at, 6 years down the road.
Yeah, that's interesting because I tell a lot of stories like that in the book about our family. And I preface those stories with, we did not ever get preferential treatment. This is just the Disney way. And if I have this many stories to tell that are just extra touches, that gives you a really good picture of how that company operates and how important their cast members are, but then also how important the guest is.
And you often hear people don't care how much you know, they only care how much you care, or what they remember. They remember how you made them feel. And that's really the experience that they give. And so if we translate this now to our listeners and their companies, what do people feel when they have an interaction with you and your team? When they walk away from an experience with you, either purchasing or receiving the service that they purchased through you, what is the feeling that they have? And do they talk about some of these things like the way that they were treated and the way that they felt? And when you look at it, that investment in goodwill is valuable. I mean, when you look at a company like Disney, they have tons of assets that are, boats and roller coasters and shacks and houses and all these types of things. But their true value is in the goodwill that they've created, the reputation that the brand has been able to create, not their physical assets.
Absolutely. It's, you have these conversations with people, and they'll talk about a company that they really like, and you'll say, well, why do you really like them? And it's just a fascinating question to ask people, because the answer, it's never price. Rarely. I mean, occasionally. It's usually not price or stuff's easy to find in their store or it's easy to navigate. It's usually, I just like them. I just connect with them. They make me feel like I'm valued. That's usually what you hear. A lot of times people don't even know how to express it. I just like it. They make me feel good. I like them. That's usually what you hear.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. And before we change gears just a little bit, I want to ask you one final Disney question. And that is, have you experienced the parks in like Paris and in China?
I have not. Experienced them through a lot of videos and blogs and talking to executives. But yeah, I would like to go to Shanghai, Paris, and Tokyo for sure. My wife is not real keen on international travel, so we're working on that little detail, but I think we'll get there eventually. But I definitely, that's on the bucket list for sure.
Well, it's on our bucket list too. And we spent a year abroad, and we were all around the Disney parks, but we just never made it in. We were living actually in Paris and never hit the Disney. So it's on our bucket list. But now, alas, it's time for us to change gears, our final section of the podcast, and that is learning from leaders, where we ask a few personal questions to go along with this business conversation. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right. So the first question, the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table, what are you reading?
So, little factoid about me, I don't really like to read books on Kindle and things like that, on digital. I like the feel of a book. I'm a physical reminder person, so if I have books laying around, I'll read them. couple of books that I haven't quite gotten into yet that I are definitely on my nightstand would be Innovation Mapping Methods. So ways that you can physically map innovation processes.
Sounds like a systems guy. You get along with Iger.
Yeah, I believe it or not, though, I'm more of a scientist, but Change the Culture, Change the Game is another one that I'm really intrigued by. So that's another one. And then I have one, Generation Gap, Generation Gap, Raising the Next Generation of Leaders. I'm kind of intrigued on joining generations together.
Yeah, and you're speaking my language with that one. That is something that's been very important to me throughout my career, is this generational flow of knowledge, value, and just culture. So great thoughts there. How about your leadership superpower?
So I'll just say one thing on the generational thing real quick. Our pastor is really cool because he makes it a point. He's very intentional about saying we need to reach each unique generation and connect them. And I love that. I just love it. So superpower, inspirational. By the way, I have to tell you, I am an assessment nerd. I love assessments. I'm certified in way too many assessments. Of course, I've built my own assessment, but inspirational is what I came out. And, I think like most people, you take these and your first reaction is either, oh yeah, dead on, or you have to think about it a little bit. I would say I had to think about this one for just a few seconds. And I was like, yeah, based on the parameters and the other choices, yeah, I think that's right.
Well, very cool. And you're referring to the superpower assessment that can be found on jakeacarlson.com/superpower, where we identify one of 5 leadership platforms that you lead from. And while many of us have different traits and lead from different platforms depending on the situation that we're in, oftentimes there's one dominant one, and inspiration tends to be a very high chosen one for guests of this podcast. And I think it's because people who are in the business of being on a podcast, or feel comfortable getting on and sharing their story, or writing books and sharing them, tend to have this drive to inspire other people, either through not necessarily cheerleading, but just by giving them the knowledge and the data, the background, the foundation to help take them to the next level, which is how I define inspiration.
That's interesting, because if like in Myers-Briggs, for instance, I'm labeled as extroverted, but the reality is, if you dig into this kind of step 2 results, I'm really only extroverted when I feel like I have something to share with the world. And so I totally buy into what you're saying. Like I'm not a big evangelist. I'm not going to shake the roof off of a building. But when I get passionate about something and I feel an obligation, or it's my duty to share it with the world, then I think that's where the inspirational kind of style comes in.
Yeah, I agree with you totally on that one. All right, our next question then is a leadership quote, philosophy, or mantra, something that you live by.
I don't know if you've heard of Martha Graham.
Martha Graham. Doesn't ring a bell today.
All right, so you need to look Martha Graham up. Revolutionary dancer and choreographer, phenomenal person. And 2 quotes from her that kind of blend together, so I'll recite them both. You are unique, and if that is not fulfilled, then something is lost. That's the first one. I love looking at talent and psychological talents, things like that. And then her other quote is, I have spent all my life with dance and being a dancer. It's permitting life to use you in a very intense way. Sometimes it is not pleasant. Sometimes it is fearful, but nevertheless, it is inevitable. Like you're always going to find your purpose. I just love that. Someone who's committed to helping people.
And I love that word permit. I love the way that she kind of framed that. So thank you for those both great quotes, and I think very relevant to this conversation today. Our final question then is the book that you most often gift to friends, family, or colleagues.
So one thing you're learning about me here is you say book singular. I just can't narrow things down to one. I rarely can.
Send them a stack. All
right. So here's what I'm going to say. These are all tied together. I usually kind of bundle books when I give them to people. So the first one, which really changed my life, is Purpose Driven Life by Rick Warren. And I just think he has a unique way. I mean, that book is just phenomenal. But I think closely tied to that would be The Path by Lori Beth Jones,
which is one I'm not familiar with.
So that one helps you sort out your personal mission statement, your purpose in life. Closely tied to that would be Start With Why by Simon Sinek.
A must read. I agree.
Yes. And then Are You Fully Charged by Tom Rath, a Gallup book.
So two books that I've read and highly recommend, two books that I haven't read, but need to put on my book list. So 4 great recommendations for us. We'll have a whole stack of reading coming out of this podcast. This has been a great conversation. I love jumping into this, kind of the Disney way. I love how you call it. Disney is a legacy company. And the conversation has been just fascinating. Before we let you go, how can we find out more about you and pick up a copy of this great book?
Absolutely. So the book is titled Entrepreneurship the Disney Way. You can find it on Amazon, among other major outlets. You just have to make sure you spell entrepreneurship right. That's even hard for us sometimes.
Yeah, it is.
But it should pull up after entrepreneurship and the. So that's good in the search. As far as where you can find out more information about me and my colleague, Mike Goldsby, you can go to www.elprofile.com. So Entrepreneurial Leadership Profile, EL Profile. You can also find us on just about every social media platform, especially for those, for 35 plusers. It is just Mind2, the number 2, Mind2 Momentum.
Well, very cool. And we'll link it up on the show notes so that our listeners can just go to one place, click on it, and be directed right to all those great resources. Again, Rob, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing the Disney experience, your book, and all your expertise, and being this week's Modern Leadership expert.
Thank you.
All right, my friends, what do you think of that? Are you creating happiness? I mean, isn't that the Disney way? And not only is it the Disney way, but can it not be the way of your company, of your business, of your life? Creating happiness. I love this conversation of customer service, of delivering value to your customers and allowing them to be evangelists for your company, allowing them to be excited and inspired by your company and send business your way. Of course, everything that we talked about on this episode of the podcast can be found on the show notes, jakeacarlson.com/ML123. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And of course, remember that everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.